Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Dan and I'm here to bring you another FPL video. So in this one we're going to be looking at a Game Week 9 watch list. After the international break, had a bit of a break myself as well from creating content, but back at it this week with some essential players that I think we can consider, whether you're on wildcard, 2 free transfers, 1 free transfer, whatever your position is. I think these are players that you should be looking at for Game Week 9 and beyond. So I've got a breakdown of their stats, their heat maps so far this season. And yeah, let's break it down. So if you are new to the channel, then consider subscribing to me, completely free, and you can always change your mind. And of course, if you do enjoy the content, then smash that like button below as well. And feel free to comment below on any headaches, any questions, or just in general, any feedback for the channel. I do my best to respond to every single one of you. So let's have a look first of all then at the first player, and that is of course this man here, James Maddison. So a few kind of maybe debates going on outside of FPL for the fact that he wasn't called up by Gareth Southgate for England. But from an FPL standpoint, I think actually it's maybe helped his appeal a little bit, because Brendan Rodgers clearly needed to change something within this Leicester side. This man specifically, though, hasn't really needed much to extra, let's say, to pick up on form. I think he's provided an exceptional amount of value already. When we looked at those 8 million price point midfielders at the beginning of the season, he never really came into my thinking, to be honest. But he seems to be a little bit fixture proof recently in scoring goals even against the toughest opponents, most notably against Tottenham in his last week, right? So he scored a respectable 29 points over those first 8 game weeks. His XG and XA aren't exactly phenomenal, but he is on quite a lot of set pieces, both direct free kicks and of course those corners on either side, as you can see in the heat map below me. He's registered 3 goals and 1 assist in those 8 weeks. But if we have a look at that fixture run coming up from Game Week 9, I think honestly now more than ever Leicester need to kick on, right? They're at the bottom of the table. They need something, and I think this man can produce it. I think if you watched the post-match interview from the Tottenham defeat, he was very, very professional. Probably one of the best footballer interviews I've seen for a long time, to be honest. You know, didn't throw Brendan Rodgers under the bus. Very, very professional and respectable towards his manager. And I think ultimately he just, you know, he's almost a deserved captain, really, of the side, to be honest. He just seems to be, you know, on and off the pitch, clearly a key member of this team. And I think that helps us from an FPL standpoint as well. I know that doesn't constitute to direct points for us, but that attitude and mentality for him, I think, helps going into this run of fixtures that are favourable for Leicester, with an international break as well, with not many people kind of, in terms of key players at least, you know, sort of playing many minutes. He could really provide something for us here. So for me personally, he is in the wild card. He was pretty much one of the first transfers I made, trying to catch a potential price rise, and I do think that will happen. I think he'll come back up to the 8 million mark before the deadline this week, but he is currently 7.9 million, and I just think at that amount of money, he's an exceptional value player, right? So I do think we're going to see more of a form come from him after those run of fixtures below. So definitely number 1 on this list for those reasons. Second on the list, I've gone with I could have gone with essentially other premiums, let's say, but I have gone with this man Son. I think the reality is that again, we use this word a lot on the channel, but variants come into play massively in Game Week 8. But it showcases what he can do. You know, over half of his points were scored in 1 game week, so he scored 36 overall, and 19 of those points were scored in Game Week 8. So I don't necessarily think that he's necessarily the most consistent premium that we've seen over these past 8 weeks, and maybe moving forward he also might not be, but he's got the haul in his locker essentially. And I think if you were on a setup where you wanted a premium, whether it be Son, De Bruyne, to cover that kind of Salah mark, if you wanted him from Game Week 12 onwards, I think really this man can be considered. He has got Arsenal and Manchester United in Game Week 9 and 12 respectively, as you can see below. But in between that, he's got Brighton, Everton and Newcastle. Now, Brighton, of course, have lost Graham Potter. I don't think defensively they're going to be, you know, too much of a let's say, a weaker team to target. But it is at the Amex as well, which has been a difficult stadium to go to so far. But of course, Everton are leaking goals. I think Pickford probably will be back by that point, but still, they have been leaking goals in the first 8 weeks, so potentially he can do some damage there. And I think, you know, with Arsenal and Man United, both both of those teams like to essentially play, right? So I think we'll see essentially Arsenal definitely. That I think that London derby, he could do some massive damage. We already saw the win for United against Arsenal. They don't just rest on their laurels. Arteta's got them playing very progressive football. And I think really when you've got pace in behind like Son has, he could probably deliver something against Arsenal, even though on paper it looks like a red fixture, right? So I think if you want a premium in your midfield, in really, you don't have to have it as a placeholder for Salah. You could arguably go without him. But if you wanted that premium spot, then I think this man has to be considered, right? He's as you can see there, his XG and XA much better than Maddison's overall. His expected goals 0.41 per 90 minutes. He's also on both side corners and set pieces. We can see where he is in terms of the box, right? He hasn't been as clinical this season in terms of finishing. He's expected. He pretty much exceeded all of his statistics last season, right? And a very well-deserved joint Golden Boot winner. Ultimately, he hasn't shown form across the first 8 game weeks, but what he has done is shown how penetrable he can be pretty much within, just give him that chance, give him that opportunity, and maybe you could say that it's a bit of Conte genius, right? You know, there was question marks over him starting. He was on the substitutes bench. He come on and scores a hat-trick. So if there's any way to prove to your manager that you should be in the starting 11, this man comes on and delivers it, right? So I think there's no arguments now that he's probably going to be in the starting 11 and against Arsenal and potentially produce some good. So I think he's a very, very, not essential candidate, but a very, very promising one for that swap from Salah to another premium, right? So very, very strong pick, I think, overall. Moving into the third option here that I've got, which is Ivan Toney. So we've had news now that Isak looks like he's pretty much out for at least a couple of weeks. He was at 75% flagged, and then after pulling out of the Sweden squad, he's now at 25% after some recent information. So I think really it's now all focus on that third striker slot. I think most managers now would have gone for Haaland, Mitrovic, and then someone else. So it could be Toney already, but if you went for Isak, then ultimately I think he's a pretty easy move, right, from Isak to Toney, as long as you've got a few point millions in the bank. But this man, he's on penalties. He's got a favourable run of fixtures, bar that Chelsea fixture in game week 12. But ultimately, we don't know how Potter's going to be for Chelsea over the next few weeks. That can still prove a favourable fixture for him. So on penalties, we've seen him score that wonderful direct free kick as well when he scored his hat-trick. He's just an all-round, I think, a fantastic player to own, with a tremendous amount of value. And with Bournemouth in game week 9, he could even be a potential captaincy option, right? We've got Maddison against Forest. Haaland, of course, plays against Manchester United at the Etihad, so potentially we don't take the armband off him. But really, if you wanted to go differential in terms of a captain pick, I can see Toney doing some real damage to Bournemouth. Brentford play some great football. I think he was unfortunate not to have really featured for England in terms of a full game after that call-up. I think it's a little bit unfair from Southgate. He's stuck to pretty much what he knows, and he didn't really get a run out. But ultimately, it's meant that there was no injury risk, and essentially he's still trained. He probably will come back quite fresh, to be honest, for game week 9. So I think he's a must own moving forward, to be honest, especially on that wild card. And if you've got a free transfer and Isak looks like the one that seems to be the one that's going to be out for a couple of weeks, I think that's an easy move for me. So very, very good stats, very, very good output so far. I think he's going to feature predominantly in my wildcard team. So definitely one to consider. Moving into the fourth option, there is maybe some debate on this one. I think, to be honest, he kind of fits a secondary premium in some ways. He's a little bit cheaper than others. So, Son and De Bruyne, you would say, are probably placeholders for Salah if you wanted to go down that route. But Sterling's statistics, I mean, for essentially almost 2 million cheaper as opposed to the Son and De Bruyne moves, he's under 10% owned, so he's a similar ownership to Son. He's actually scored some relatively, some good amount of points. He hasn't had a haul like Son has. So Son had 36. Of course, Sterling has 34. But his statistics overall are pretty good. We don't know what to expect from Potter with Chelsea yet, to be honest. We haven't seen enough of them. But he is in my wildcard at the moment, to be honest. I think that this price point, I can easily move some players around to still get to Salah or De Bruyne or Son if one of them hits form. it means just booking in essentially a couple of transfers if I wanted to do that. But at the moment, I'm looking at spreading my funds across the team a little bit more. And I think this man can do some damage. I mean, really, you've only got Manchester United in game week 13 there to what I'd potentially say worry about in terms of maybe a trickier fixture. But it is at home. You know, Manchester United have looked a little bit better defensively, but it'll be interesting to see how they do on that run-up of that sort of 4 or 5 matches defensively to anticipate, do we need to move Sterling on at that point, right? So I don't think he's a guaranteed transfer out, especially in those first 4 weeks. And really, from a wildcard perspective, he's definitely someone that, with fixtures like that, a player, you know, you want someone to be in your team for really kind of 3 to 4 weeks to essentially give us the most value out of that chip use, right? So I think he's got some fantastic fixtures ahead of him, proving some great stats. His heat map isn't exactly maybe perfect in terms of where we'd want him, but I'm interested to see how the dynamic with Aubameyang works out with him. But I still think he may be worth taking that punt over these next few weeks, especially given those fixtures, right? So again, maybe a bit debatable. The 10 million price point is a bit of a tricky one. Not many managers have players in this price bracket, you know, Fernandes, Sterling, and of course then you do need to pretty much jump from that 10 million price point all the way down to 8 or all the way up to 12. So there's a bit of a bit of leverage that you need to find elsewhere in the team to kind of fit this man in. But I think if you can fit him in, he may be worth the punt. So he's kind of maybe a bit more of an outlandish pick, which is why he's kind of on 4th on the list, really. I think the other 3 are much more, let's say, secure and a bit more safe. But finally, I have gone back to the differential of the week on this watch list. So again, even though players are wildcarding quite significantly, I think this week as well as last week, I have put this man in as well because again, with the news of Isak, I think really, to be honest, it makes sense that if you can't quite get to, or say for example, you can't, you want to move some money around, let's say, and you want to be able to get Trent back, for example, you want to upgrade one of your defenders, and the only way of doing that is maybe downgrading Isak, as he is, like I say, on the injury list so far. Then maybe this man is worth a punt. I mean, his statistics aren't really phenomenal; they aren't really out there in terms of where he crops up and plays, but he's already registered a goal and assist. He's actually only played 6 out of the potential 8 game weeks. One of those was a 45-minute appearance, I believe, through injury. So he didn't feature for all 8 game weeks, and his statistics kind of, are a little bit skewed based on that in comparison to other options. But he's actually 0.6% owned, which is very, very small in terms of the game, right? So he's on penalties. We'd argue that he's probably nailed. And I think, to be honest, Bournemouth, they aren't the worst team. Defensively, they are a team that we could target, but they can still put some passes together and essentially still score goals. I mean, I was pleasantly surprised that they did manage to score a goal against Newcastle, to be honest, although this man wasn't involved in that. That was Billing, of course, that scored the goal. I still think that with him being on penalties and a cheap asset, there is, of course, a lot of, let's say, strikers that are alternatives to him that could probably beat him. But if you wanted to free up a little bit of money, and again, look at those fixtures below, right? You've got Brentford, Leicester, Fulham, Southampton and West Ham. None of those teams really have been, let's say, bankers in terms of clean sheets. So if he's going to score goals, I think these next 5 game weeks are potentially where he does it. And all the way out to game week 16, Bournemouth's fixtures aren't terrible. So again, I would back him to get some returns within that time frame. It's just a question of whether you want to back, like I say, the differential in this case, and if you want to use the money elsewhere as opposed to maybe going as to someone like Ivan Toney or Mitrovic or someone else. So like I say, I've kind of put him here as a differential only. He's not necessarily a nailed pick. He isn't featured in my wildcard in terms of this week onwards, but I have considered him from later on in the game weeks ahead. So I think, yeah, he's someone to consider. So hopefully, guys, you found the information useful and content as useful as always. As I say, please feel free to drop a like on the content if you do like it, and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. I've also got an additional link now in the description below. Of course, this isn't a monetized channel. I do it just as a hobby, but I have had some messages from individuals asking how they could support me. Essentially, I've made a buy me a coffee websites that you can go on to and essentially just drop me a donation if you feel like I'm essentially worthy of it, or you want to show some support. I'll leave that link in the description below for you to check out. I've also got lots of Amazon affiliate links that are pretty much all just my setup for streaming and for making videos. If you're interested, even if you're looking at just buying a pillow, a quilt, I don't know, anything from Amazon, if you go through my link, I will be able to get some kind of small commission from that, and it just helps support the channel. Again, though, I do this as a hobby, so I'm not expecting that from you, but feel free to do so if you want to show your support. And yeah, thanks again for all the support so far. So thanks for tuning into the video, guys. I've got plenty more content coming up this week ahead of the deadline, and of course I'll be putting a deadline stream together for that game week 9. So yeah, wildcard guide probably coming up next, and I will see you over there shortly. Take care.